Okay, so we're going to attempt to start what I've been hoping to start for a long time. And I've been working on trying to figure out how to start this for quite a few months now. And thankfully, now seems like now is a good opportunity to do it. I have the time. And the new Hakdama to the Zohar from the Baal HaSulam coming out from Koren is either came out or is coming out very, very shortly. And so that seemed an opportune time to try and start this. And God willing, Koren or Share rather will be sending out copies of that to everybody who signed up for them in the next week or so. And it'll take as long as it takes to get to you, but they're going to try and get it there as fast as possible. And for now, the Baal HaSulam's Hakdama to the Zohar is available on Sefaria, so anyone who wants to see it there can. But we're not going to get too far, I think, tonight. So it's not necessarily so critical to have the text. But the idea is just to kind of work through the text. The Hakdama to the Zohar from the Baal HaSulam is not a very, very long text. It's only 71 paragraphs long. And not terribly, it's dense, but it's not a very, very long sefer. So just by way of introduction, I want to just do a little bit of an introduction to the Baal HaSulam himself. So the Baal HaSulam, Rav Yehuda Halevi Ashlag, he was born in 1885 in Poland. And he was one of the primary preeminent Mikubalim of the 20th century, certainly the preeminent Ashkenazi Mikubalim of the 20th century. So he was born in Łódź in 1885, and he lived in Warsaw for a while, and eventually he made his way to Yerushalayim in 1920, I believe. And for a while he was unknown, and he worked in different menial jobs until some people got to figure out who he was and what he was. And eventually he took a position as a Rav in Yerushalayim, and he moved to Yaffo, and he moved to Tel Aviv, in different places in Israel. And he wrote a variety of very, very important Svarim in Kabbalah. So probably the most well-known one is his Parish HaSulam on the Zohar. He wrote a parish on the entire Zohar, a Hebrew translation with a commentary on the entire Zohar. It runs usually, most editions of it are 10 thick volumes like this. And that is probably what he's best known for. That's where he picks up the name Baal HaSulam. But aside from that, he wrote other very, very important works that perhaps are less well known. He wrote a sefer called Talmud Eser Sfiros, which is really a commentary on parts of Eitz Chaim by the Arizal, and an explanation of the Seder HaShtalshelus as described in Eitz Chaim, the way in which reality unfolds from the Ein Sof, or the Or Ein Sof, down to the multiplicity and particularities of the physical world. And so he has a commentary on that. And he has a sefer, it's printed in different ways, but he wrote a number of different introductions to Kabbalah. And the Hakdama to the Zohar is one of them, but he wrote a variety of other ones as well. And then he wrote different mamar and different essays on different topics. So very, very prolific writer, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of writing he did during his lifetime, and very, very influential as well. Okay, so in terms of his approach, or in terms of his methodology, he died, by the way, Rav Ashlag died in 1954, so not so long ago. And he had a handful of close students. His son, Rav Baruch Halevi Ashlag, took over after him, or took his place afterwards, and had other students. It's worth just noting that one of the Baal HaSulam's big ideas or commitments was a commitment to publicizing and popularizing Pnimius HaTorah and Kabbalah. He thought that this was the time and this is what was needed, and it was important to publicize this stuff much more. And that, of course, can be a double-edged sword. A lot of positive came from that. And also, as is probably well known, a lot of negative has come out of the school, let's say, of the Baal HaSulam, not directly from Rabbi Yehuda Levi Ashlag, but quite a few of Rav Baruch Levi Ashlag, the Baal HaSulam's sons, students, have sort of gone off and done perhaps less conventionally acceptable things. The Kabbalah Center is a product of a student of Baruch Levi Ashlag, and there's there are groups in Israel that some have argued or claimed are cults and self-serving cults and things like that have grown out of this. So there are always risks to popularizing and spreading this kind of stuff around. But he thought that this was what was needed and this was important and it has to be out there. And everything that has great potential always entails great risk. And sometimes bad things are going to happen. And but he was against the approach that the post Shabtai approach, which was if bad things happen from as a result of Kabbalah, so let's keep it as secret as possible and not let people have access to it. And he opposed that. And the risk had to be taken, and even the negatives, arguably from the perspective of Panini Sator, even the negative outcomes, they must be serving some positive purpose. Tikkun hachalvona masha lo tikkun halavona, right? As the Arizal says, and Rashash talks about this, and others, that in the recipe for the Ketoris, there was one spice that was a bad smelling spice, but it provided the right balance and helped worked with the other spices to produce the reach nichoach and the good smell of the incense of the Ketoris in the Beis Hamikdash, and that probably applies across the board to many other things. And so arguably, yeah, there are negative outcomes, certainly, to some of the branches that have grown out of the Baal HaSulam and his school. But those two probably are serving their role in some way, shape, or form somehow as well. Okay, so before we get into the actual text, and again, we're not going to get too far today, but before we get into it, just a little note about the Baal HaSulam's overall approach to Kabbalah in general. So the Baal HaSulam was from a Hasidic home and a Hasidic family, and his approach to Kabbalah was very much influenced by the approach of Hasidus and the Baal Shem Tov. And what that means is that he appreciated that all of Kabbalah has to be understood in terms of mashal and nimshal. It's a metaphor speaking about other things. So the things we describe in Kabbalah are not literal. They exist, but they don't exist the way we interpret those words to exist as they refer to things in our world. Right. So when we talk about things in Kabbalah, like human figures and faces and ears and eyes and mouths and people and lights and worlds and so on and so forth, and fathers and mothers and all this stuff, these don't correspond to the things that we use those terms to describe. They correspond to real things. They are real things, but the nature and the character of things that they're describing is different, inherently different. They're purely spiritual realities, different from the way we describe those things or the things we use those words to describe in our world. We use those terms in Kabbalah because they refer to, or they're used as metaphors and mashalim and parables for other spiritual realities. And those spiritual realities are kind of the spiritual roots of the physical realities we encounter in our world. So, right, meaning we encounter something called eyes in our world, right? I have eyes, you have eyes, we have eyes. And eyes are created by something. They're created by a ratzon, they're created by a particular china, or an aspect of the or elokus, of the energy and will and desire of God for there be something to exist. That particular aspect of the Ratzon Hashem translates into the thing we call an I. That means that translation of that particular Ratzon into the thing we call an I inevitably means that the nature of that or, the nature of that will, of that Ratzon that produces the thing called an I, has characteristics of the inner meaning or the inner essence of what an I is. That's how there's correspondence between the two. That's how it produces that thing in the physical world, right? You project, I'm projecting a light, so to speak, onto a screen. So if I project that light onto a physical screen, it will produce a physical manifestation of that light. The physical manifestation of that light isn't the light itself. But there's an alignment, or there's a degree of alignment and identification between the physical thing and the source of that physical thing. So we'll use terms in Kabbalah that are referring to or talking about physical objects, physical phenomenon, physical experiences. They are different. The thing we're referring to, the spiritual things we're referring to, are not those things, but nevertheless, they are they have correspondence to the physical things. They have a likeness, and they're the source of those physical things. I say all of that to point out, really, that Rav Ashlag's approach emphasized this idea. This idea that everything we talk about in Kabbalah is really all about giving us language and a mindset and a vocabulary for to be used as tools for practical avodah, for practical inner work, for spiritual work, spiritual development. If learning Kabbalah is about transforming yourself, but transforming your character, transforming your relationship with God, relationship to other people, relationship to yourself, through a better understanding of kind of the architecture of reality. And by appreciating the architecture of reality, I can then use and use that knowledge to kind of shift and how I relate to things. And so he was very much a proponent of using the study of Kabbalah not as an end in and of itself, but as a means to actual work, actual development. And the essential nakuda, the central point of his entire system of like what is the thing that we're trying to work on, is the idea of transforming ourselves, and we'll talk about this a lot when we get into the actual Sefer. The idea is of all avoda, the underlying idea of all avoda, the purpose of all reality, is to transform creation and align it with the Creator. And the difference between created beings and the Creator is the fact that created beings are born and not only born, created innately by the fact that they have a desire to receive things for themselves. They experience lack, and therefore they have a desire for the things that they think will fill that lack and will satisfy them. And the Creator, of course, has no lack. The Creator is whole and perfect, yachid, echad, and miyuchad, and is totally not needing anything. And therefore, the Creator has no ratzon l'kabel, a will to receive anything. The Creator is just a pure ratzon lahashbos, a desire to give and give and give and give. And so the distance between a created being and the Creator is very, very vast from this perspective. Two opposites ends of the spectrum. The Creator is pure giving. Created, by definition, is pure receiving. Because we're entirely dependent on the Creator. We have nothing of our own. Everything about our existence is dependent on something outside of ourselves. And therefore, we are a pure desire to receive. And the idea of avoda in this world is to transform slowly, little by little, to transform our ratzon l'kabel, our desire to receive, our sense of lack, our sense of neediness, and therefore our desire to get from others for ourselves, to transform that into a pure ratzon lahashbos, into a desire to give, which ultimately comes from a sense of self-sufficiency, emunah, trust, security, etc., etc. That process, that transformative process, that inner shift in how we look at things and what it is we're trying to do all the time, get or give, that is the sum total of all of the Baal HaSulam's teachings, that shift. Making that shift from being a receiving a creature to a giving creature is it is to shift one's entire being closer to being in alignment with God, which makes us closer and closer to God in the sense that we are more alike to God in our essence. Not we're physical beings, and God is not a physical being, of course, but in our essence, that we are a pure desire to receive things, is now becoming an essence of a pure desire to give and give and give. And as that happens, we become closer and closer in essence to God. And the idea in the very, very big picture is then that as more and more of us do that, and as the world does that, the world slowly comes closer to appreciate that the world and God are really just one thing. We just didn't appreciate it before because we were wrapped up in this desire to receive, and ego and insecurity and fear and so on and so forth. We needed stuff from outside of ourselves. As we need less and less from outside of ourselves, we become self-sufficient within ourselves. That makes us more God-like, so to speak. And that means that at a certain point, everything just becomes godly. We become godly. The world becomes godly. Reality becomes godly, because the thing that separated us from God begins to disappear, and gradually, slowly, little by little. To the extent that it's disappeared, the world is full of more godliness or more awareness of godliness. And so all of Kabbalah for the Baal HaSulam is just about trying to get us to appreciate how that works and how that happens, and therefore to be able to actually engage in that avodah. Okay, so that's the big picture. That's the big picture. And with that big picture, we can turn to just the very beginning of the Sefer. Okay, so the Sefer is divided up in two paragraphs. Again, I made the mistake of not having a PDF to share in the group, so I apologize in advance. It's on Sefaria if anyone wants to grab it and pull it up. It's the Baal HaSulam's Hakdama. I think it's in Sefaria. It's titled Hakdamos L'Chachmas HaEmes Sefer HaZohar. But in any case, we'll start from the beginning, and we'll just go through the first paragraph today. I think he opens up the Sefer. He opens up the Sefer with a series of questions, questions that he's going to try and answer. He says as follows, paragraph Aleph. He says, Ritzoni b'hakdamazu. In this introduction, I wanted to do the following. I wanted to clarify a variety of different things that seem obvious, simple, and straightforward. Koloma, asher yidei hakol mimash mashos bahem. Things that everybody is constantly busy with. People engage with these things all the time. And much ink has been spilled in order to try and explain and clarify these ideas. And nevertheless, despite all of the effort, we haven't actually achieved a real good understanding, a knowledge, a clarity about, and a satisfactory understanding of these ideas, right? Yudia berura umasvekos, right? A satisfying and clear understanding of these ideas. The satisfying part is very, very important. Really, I think this is all starting from a sense of what I currently know and what I've currently been taught, and the worldview I currently have, and the understanding of Torah and Yados and God and myself and so on and so forth. It's not doing it for me, right? One of the core, this is core for the Baal HaSulam as well, but core in general in many drachim and schools in Kabbalah, is the idea that everything has to start with a sense of chisaron. Everything has to start with a sense of chisaron, a sense of lack. There's no room, there's no space there's no ability to access Sisrei Torah, Chachmas Emes, Kabbalah. There's no room to access this kind of stuff if you think you have it. That's essential. This is built in, by the way, to the way within Kabbalah we find the world being described, with the Seder HaShtalshalos, the way the world unfolds being described. The Arizal opens up its time with the incredible idea that before everything, there's just an Or Ein Sof Pashut Mamale Kol Metzias. All there is just Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of, or Ha Ein Sof, the light of the infinite, or the infinite light. There are different emphases that. Thank you so much, Neil. You are the best tech guy in the world. Thank you. Neil just posted a link to the Sefer if anyone wants it. So the Arizal opens up by saying that before there's a creation, there's just Or Ein Sof. And he implies that, well, it would just stay that way forever and ever. What is it that gets anything moving? The thing that gets anything moving, unbelievably, he says, is a sense of chisaron, is a sense of lack and deficiency within the Or Ein Sof, that prompts the Or Ein Sof to shift from being an Or Ein Sof to manifesting this idea of tzimtzum, of contraction, of opening space within itself for other things, or to appear to exist or experience existence as if they're not just the Or Ein Sof. And so the Arizal is describing there at the very, very outset that even the Or Ein Sof, and now it's important to say the Or Ein Sof is not God. It can't be God, because the Arizal is describing that the Or Ein Sof experiences lack. The Or Ein Sof, in order to be complete, needs creation. That's what the Arizal says, because the Or Ein Sof encompasses everything, and encompassing everything means also encompassing different ways to explain this, or different schools of thought to how to describe this. But if the Or Ein Sof is infinite, then the Or Ein Sof must also include within itself finitude, because otherwise it's not infinite, right? It's the God who can't create the rock it can't lift. To truly be Ein Sof has to include the ability to manifest finitude, limit. And in order for that to be the case, there needs to be limited expression from the Or Ein Sof. If you're just the Or Ein Sof, there is no limits yet. It's just an Or Ein Sof that fills everything, and limits don't exist. There's nothing that is limited in the world. And so the Arizal says the Or Ein Sof is missing something. Or to put it another, as we know, has many names, many manifestations, because it includes everything. So the Or Ein Sof includes within itself the Shem Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. It includes within itself the Shem Elokus, the Shem Adonai, all different names that God is known by. It also includes within itself all the titles that God is known by, and all the nicknames, kinuyim, that God is known by. Father, King, merciful, kind, etc., etc., etc. None of those things can be real unless there's a creation. Because if there's only Or Ein Sof, there's no such thing as judge. There's no such thing as parents, fathers. There's no such thing as kings. None of those things exist as concepts. And if they don't exist as concepts, the name Melech, the name Dayan, the name Chanun, Rachum, etc., even the name Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which implies something that collapses time and transcends time within itself. Well, there's no such thing as time, so the Shem Havaya makes no sense, and it can't actually be a relevant conception if there is no time, and time hasn't been created. And so the Arizal says, well, the Or Ein Sof is experiencing lack, is experiencing chisaron, and because the Or Ein Sof experiences chisaron, that chisaron needs to be filled, and as a result of that chisaron being filled, we have everything that we have, because creation kicks in. Okay? So the Baal HaSulam here is starting off by making a very important point, which is we can only get started in this when we have an appreciation, or not an appreciation, because it may not be true for some of us, but if we have an appreciation that whatever we know and whatever we've been fed and whatever we've been given and read and learned and studied, it's not enough. It doesn't satisfy. There are gaps and there are holes, and it doesn't explain what it needs to explain. I'm looking for more. That already is a sense of chisaron. Sense of chisaron opens up a space within which more can be received. It creates a kli that can hold more or. But without that sense of lack, there is nothing to go with. Gemara talks about this in a couple of different places, and this is also the famous idea that people shouldn't learn Kabbalah until male kreso b'shasu poskim, until they're full of shasa, until their stomachs are full of the regular nigla of Gemara and halacha and so on and so forth. And many people, usually people who have nothing to do with Kabbalah, understand that to mean, well, no one knows everything, so I guess no one should learn Kabbalah. Until you know all of Shas and Poskim, don't touch Kabbalah. The way most Mikubalim that I've ever seen actually interpret that idea of Male Kreso B'Shasu Poskim is that, like when someone overeats, Male Kreso, like you get full, you get fed up. Not doing it for me anymore. I'm not enjoying this anymore. I'm not satisfied by this anymore. It's not satisfying me. I'm fed up with it. Then you have to turn to something else. But there always has to, everything has to start with a sense of chisaron. If there's no sense of chisaron, then nothing changes. There's no movement. You just stay exactly where you are because you're experiencing shleimus, you're experiencing tamilos. Everything is good the way it is, so we don't change anything. The movement to something else, and especially the movement to Pnimius HaTorah and Chachmas Emes, is a movement that has to be prompted by a sense of chisaron. And that chisaron is critical because it is also a sense of chisaron, if appreciated in an authentic way, also means a sense of humility. I lack something, therefore I'm not everything. I don't understand everything. And therefore one approaches this with a sense of humility, and it becomes a much safer way to approach this kind of Torah, with humility, as opposed to I know. If you approach this Torah with a sense of I know, I think that's a recipe for it going bad places. Okay, so in any case, that's where he starts us off. Okay, so he wants to clarify a variety of different things that many people spend lots of time talking about, but at least from his perspective, we have not yet achieved a satisfactory, good understanding. And he begins with 5 questions. Shaila Aleph. The first question is as follows. Ma mahusenu. The first question is, what is our mahus? What is our essence? It's an interesting question. What is a mahus? What is our mahus is the question, but he's asking what is our mahus, or what is our essence? He's asking us really, as we peel back the layers of what is accreted onto us, and we dig deeper and deeper and deeper to figure out and identify what we are at our core, not the contingent things that we are, right? Lots of things about me are contingent. My age is contingent because it was different yesterday and it'll be different tomorrow, and it changes, right? My physical features are different. My character traits are different. My midos are different, right? Most of our teachers, we work on those, we change those, we shift those. My intelligence is different. My knowledge is different. All of these things are contingent. They are not my essence. My essence is the core of me. It's me by definition. My malchus is me itself. That means it's not something that changes. It's not something that shifts. It's not something I picked up at a certain point or was imposed on me at a certain point. So my attitudes, my beliefs, my character traits, my securities, my insecurities, all of this stuff, these are not my malchus. And every person can sort of reflect for themselves and appreciate that, like, what things of me are not me. And as you peel those away, you get to deeper and deeper levels of what you think is me. Right. So I know that the sweater I'm wearing is not me, but I take off the sweater, and then I think, oh, now I got to me. I took off the sweater, but then I realize I'm wearing a shirt. So Take off my shirt, right? And then I'm down to my skin, but my skin is not me either, right? I can peel away my skin. My skin is just a physical thing that's attached to me, and you peel away my skin, and I am still here, right? So what is that thing? What is it that makes me me? What is my essence, deeper and deeper, and beyond everything that can be grasped or conceptualized, or put in a box or defined? That's your mahus. But what is that mahus? That's what he's asking. What is our mahus? What's the me? What's me? Right? Even if I'm sitting here and I have thoughts floating through my head, right? Even the way I'm describing it, I have thoughts floating through my head. So the head is not me, it's my head. And the thoughts are not me, they're my thoughts. I possess them, but they're not me. They're being possessed by me, right? And I have feelings, and I have a body, and I have eyes, and I have attitudes, and I have assumptions, and I have beliefs. And so these are not me, they're things that I possess. As we peel the things that I possess away, which we can call chitzonius, right? They're external to me, myself. They're not the panemius of me, or they are extrinsic to me. And so he's asking here in Shayla Aleph, what is me? And for all of us, what is me? What is it that makes that is our essence? That's the first question he wants to deal with. Shayla Beis, or that's the first question he's going to address in the Sefer. Okay, Shayla Beis. The second question is Ma tafkidenu b'shalshelas hametzias harucha sha'anu tivos katanos tabos katanos. What is our purpose in the long chain of reality within which we are just tiny rings? We are tiny links in a chain, in a giant chain of reality. And what's our role in that giant chain of reality? What are we doing? Right? Even the way he describes it, links in a chain. So, links in a chain, that's very nice. So without me, the whole chain would fall apart. That's nice. I'm very important. But what's the purpose? The purpose just to hold the chain together. Right? So connect this part of the chain to that part of the chain. That's why I'm here. I'm a placeholder. And what's the purpose of the chain? What's the purpose of holding a place in the chain and keeping the two sides of the chain connected to each other? He assumes that there's a purpose here, which is very important, right? I'm here. If I exist for a purpose. That's really, well, we'll get to that later, but I'm here for a purpose. I exist for a purpose. What is that purpose? That's the second question. What is that purpose? By the way, I think it's worth noting, again, this is my own take on this, but I think it's worth noting that he's assuming that we have one core purpose, just like we have one core mahus, right? I am different from you and different from the next person, but he's assuming ma mahusenu, like there's a core that defines what we are. We have a core common essence. What is that essence? We also have a core common purpose. What is that purpose? Doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, smart, not smart, status, not status. None of that. At core, what is our purpose? Shayla Gimel, the third question is, Hine, kisha anu mistaklim al atzmeinu. If we reflect on ourselves, if we look closely at ourselves and we reflect on ourselves, anu margishim es atzmeinu mekukalim v'shefelim ad she'en kamonu u'gnos. If we look at ourselves honestly, it seems at least, we'll feel that we are broken and lowly, so much so that there's nothing as broken and lowly as us. It's a little harsh, but not so much perhaps. And by contrast, if we look at and reflect on the maker that made us, Hare anu mechuyavim limatze barom hamalel she'in kamahu l'shvach. Then we have to recognize that the Creator is a reality that is the highest, most perfect, indescribable, a wonderful thing in the world. And that's the definition of Creator, right? That meaning our conception of God and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not like, whatever the best thing in the world is, whatever the most perfect thing out of this world is, whatever that thing is, that's God. I don't know what that thing is, but whatever that is, that's what God is. Right? This is like the famous idea of the famous quip that's attributed to the Kutzker, and it's attributed to Rafaim Brisker, and attributed to lots of people. But the atheist comes to the rabbi and says, or Rabbi, I'm an atheist, and I don't believe in God. And the rabbi says, well, good. The God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. Right? I mean, any conception of God that leaves us room for I don't believe in you is a conception of God that is not actually it's not God. Right? God is whatever that perfect thing is, whatever it is. I don't have to describe it any more than that. The ultimate. Right? That's God. So if we think of if we appreciate that that is our definition, our working definition of where God is, and again, it's the Ein Sof, it's the ultimate. There's nothing else to describe. So the distance between me and that is indescribably great. And it's very hard to understand, he asks, how that happens. How is it that a perfect God, because God is the epitome and definition of perfection, how is it that a perfect God produces me? The height of imperfection or the depth of imperfection, right? Ki hechrechu shemehapoel hashalim tutzena ulos shlemos, because it has to be the case. It's necessary. It must be that from a perfect creator comes only perfect and whole creations. Why? Because if we just define the creator as perfect, number one, that excludes the possibility that imperfection can come out of that, right? In one sense, because if you're a builder, but you built a bad building, then you're not such a great builder. You tell me you're the best builder in the world, but you build a building and it collapses, then I guess you're not such a great builder. It can't be, there's an inherent contradiction in terms here, right? God can't be perfect and shalom and the ultimate, and also produce subpar stuff, because that by definition is a chisaron and a genai, a deficiency and a mess up on the part of God. So God's not so perfect anymore. That doesn't work because God's definition doesn't change. So conceptually, this is a philosophical question, a logical question, but conceptually, how is it, he wants to know, how is it that we can square these 2 points? We have a paradox here. On the one hand, God is perfect. On the other hand, I know genuinely and truly that there's something wrong with me. I'm not perfect. How do those 2 things work together? How can they coexist? Beyond that, he's asking also something that's much deeper, which is, if God is really Ein Sof, if God encompasses everything, if nothing can exist outside of God, then where can imperfection actually come from? Right? Because if God does not partake of imperfection, there's no imperfection within Elokos. Can't be. It's perfect. So then, if so, where does imperfection come from? It can't come from nowhere. It can't come from something outside of God, because God is Echad Yachid U'Miyuchad. There's only one, and nothing exists outside of it. So there can't be anything else. So where does this imperfection come from? It's not like good God, bad God. So all the nice stuff comes from the good God, and all the bad stuff comes from bad God. That's not how this works. It's one God encompassing everything. And if the definition of that one God is all good, then bad comes from where? Right? This he says, Hechrechu. It has to be that from perfection only comes perfection. Both because that if imperfection came from perfection, it would mean that perfection is not perfect. But also because if perfection is perfect, then imperfection can't have come from there, in which case it has to have come from somewhere else. But it can't come from somewhere else because there is nothing else, ultimately. So how do we understand this? This is question 3. Sheila Dal, question number 4. Lefisha haseichel mechayev, based on what our intellect tells us, halohu yisbarach hatov umetiv she'en l'mayla hemeni yisbarach. Logically, conceptually, we know that Hashem is good and does good, and there's no good and doer of good higher than HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ve'ech bara melechatchila kol kach harbe brios shetasyanina v'tesyasrenna b'chol yemei hayosam. How can it be that this God who is, it's related, this is similar to question number 3, but how can it be that this perfectly good God, not perfect, but good, God is Hatov v'hametiv, God is Chok Hatov lahetiv, right? If God is Hatov, is the ultimate good, and the ultimate good has to do good, so to speak, has to, but you can't really say has to about God, but from the conception of God is good, is ultimate good, then God has to be doing and expressing good. So how come there's lots of bad? How come we go through life suffering from so many different things and suffering so many difficulties and challenges and upsets and so much misery and so on and so forth? How can it be? The way of good is to do good. And at least certainly not to do so much bad. Right? Again, this is a theodicy question. It's a simple question. It's a common question. Right? We started off by telling us these are simple, common questions, just that we don't have satisfactory answers to them. And this is similar to the previous question. Again, if God is kuloto, then where does suffering come from? And either that means that God is not kuloto because there's suffering, or it means that the suffering is coming from somewhere outside of God, in which case God is not God, I guess, anymore, because now there's multiple ultimate sources of things, and there's a source of good and there's a source of bad, and there's no yechidus anymore. There's no unity in God anymore. So that's question number 4. And finally, question number 5 is Eich Efshar Shemehanitzli she'ein lo rashis ve'ein lo tachlis timshachena brios havayos v'kalos minifsados. How can it be that from an eternal God who has no beginning and has no end, right? Again, anything that we can conceptualize as having a beginning and having an end, having a point of origination and a purpose, and a goal that it's working towards, and so on and so forth, that's not God. Whatever our mind lands on as we contemplate those concepts, that's not God. If there's purpose, it's not God. This is why, going back to what we started with, this is why we find many of the Mefarshim, many of the Mekubalim and Mefarshim on the Arizal point out that when the Arizal starts off by telling us that at the beginning there's an Or Ein Sof that fills everything, and that Or Ein Sof then goes ahead and does a Tzimtzum to create all of reality within that Tzimtzum because the Or Ein Sof is lacking. The Mefarshim all point out, well, the Or Ein Sof can't be God. It's not God. Actually, long before the Arizal's first words, there had to have been another Tzimtzum. Right? There's the essence of God. God itself is not the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof is an expression that God puts out there, and within that bounded expression of godliness, which we can't even talk about, and so much more so we can't even articulate anything about the thing that it comes from. But in order for the Or Ein Sof to exist, it started somewhere. It exists. And it has a purpose because it's trying to achieve something. That's why it's mitzamsim itself, and that's why it creates creations and so on and so forth. It has to go somewhere. It's trying to get somewhere. When it gets there, I guess it achieved its purpose now, right? And so if it achieves its purpose, then it's done. It went from point A to point B. It moved and it changed, and things evolved. And so many of the Mefarshim talk about how the Or Ein Sof that the Arizal begins talking about can't be HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in things we don't even write about or say, or anything way, shape, or form, for whatever reason, emanates and expresses in something as an Or Ein Sof. And then within the Or Ein Sof, which is already a bounded reality, even though that bounding and that conceptualization is beyond us, within that bounded reality, other bounded realities can begin to exist within that. in any case, the point over here is that when we talk about the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the atzmius of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the essential reality of God, which is, like, again, where our deficiencies come from and where our misery comes from, and all, right? That thing is ein lo rachis ve'ein lo tachlis, right? Didn't begin from somewhere, because everything with the beginning didn't exist at some point, and then there was a reason for it to start existing. It has no purpose, because anything with a purpose started somewhere. It started with a purpose. The Lesson Shalom HaSulam talks about this extensively in Sefer HaKolim. Anything with a purpose, anything with a yesod, anything with a siba, a reason, also has a purpose, right? The purpose and the reason are really the same thing. The starting point of everything is aligned with the reason for which that thing exists, right? The reason may not be realized until later. The goal may not be realized until later, but because there's a goal, therefore something starts to happen, right? If I want a house, I start building the house. So the thing that sets things into motion is the goal that stands at the end. And that creates the foundation for the movement and the shift that starts to begin to create the house that I want to create. Gracious and tachlis, a source, a foundation, and a purpose. They're the same thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is beyond all of those things. We can't conceptualize it. It's beyond conceptualization, because it just is, whatever that means. It just is. It is because it is because it is because it is. Turtles all the way down. There's nothing to say, all right? But how can it be, he says, question number 5, how can it be that from that thing, which is nitzchi, it's eternal, it never changes, because by definition it can't change, because ein lo rachis ve'ein lo tachlis, there's never any reason for it to change. There's no reason applicable to it. It has no purpose, it has no goals, it has no objectives, it just is in equanimity all the time. It's eternal, right? Eternal means the same all the time. It doesn't age. It doesn't move right. It doesn't move left. It doesn't have this idea and then that idea, or this want and then that want, or this intent and that intent. Nitzchi means static. How can it be that this static with a capital S, from that static with a capital S, comes impermanence? Same question as question 3 and question 4. How can from permanence and nitzchius, eternality, come impermanence and finitude and decay and aging and shifting and changing, right? So the last 3 questions are really the same question, just projected onto 3 different ideas. The first one was, how can perfection produce imperfection? Question number 4 was, how can good and goodness produce pain and suffering? And question 5 is, how can eternality produce temporality or temporariness or change? Okay, these are really, by the way, the last 3 questions. The first 2 questions are questions about like me and meaning and purpose and who am I. But the last 3 questions are really core questions in Chachmas Emes, which are just what's the relationship, or how is there a relationship, or how do we conceptualize a relationship existing between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the world and our reality? How can those 2 things be related to each other? How is it possible? There are different ways to frame that question. In other places, the question gets framed as, how can one produce many? How can singularity produce differentiation and particularity? And here he's framing it in these 3 different ways. How can, and I think maybe these 3 different ways give a little bit of an insight into kind of how he saw the world, right? He's very attuned, the Baal HaSulam is very attuned to pain and suffering. He's very attuned to good and evil. He's very attuned to change and the way things don't stay the same, and the way they're in constant flux, and the way old things, things that were once great and strong and whatever, they decay and they weaken, they decay, they die, they move on, and other things take their place, change, seem to change. Those are the three places in which like he has this like looming question of like how can we things which are the opposite and the antithesis of what we conceptualize as a perfect, good, eternal God. How can these coexist with that thing, while that thing still remains that thing? How can God be eternal, good, and perfect, and also for there to exist imperfection, evil, and pain and suffering? Those are the three questions those are the five questions in total that he has. So this was Parak Aleph, this was Sif Aleph. The next couple of Seifim are going to take this a little bit further. For now, he's asking questions. Okay, we talked a little bit about the biography of the Baal HaSulam, we talked a little bit about the bibliography of the Baal HaSulam, we talked a little bit about the derech of the Baal HaSulam and Kabbalah, and how he was very focused on avoda, and the understanding of the relationship we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu and Kadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with the world and how these things work is all just a tool for like, how can I shift how I function in this world, how I experience this world, how I act, and so on. And then he asks these five questions. These five questions are genuine questions. These are the questions that frame the entire Sefer essay. Call it what you like. It's not very long again. But these five questions frame the whole Sefer, and these five questions, he's going to answer these questions. It's going to take 70 paragraphs to answer these questions, but he's going to answer these questions and provide us in answering those questions with kind of a framework for understanding ultimately what is the relationship between a singular, perfect, good, eternal God with the multiplicity, pluralism, particularity, imperfection, pain, suffering, and temporariness of human beings and the human experience. And doing that, he provides a foundation and a framework for then working on and working and getting into all kinds of important practical avoda. Okay? So Be'ezras Hashem, hopefully we'll continue next week. I don't know how long it'll take to get through the whole thing. Parts of it are easier, parts of it are denser. But Be'ezras Hashem will go as we can and make our way slowly through it. Thanks so much and have a lovely Shabbos.